My name is Daniel Shugrue. I'm Director of Industrial Cybersecurity at CyberX. And CyberX is an OT security solutions provider with experience across the globe securing G2000 companies from OT and IoT risks. So what we're going to cover today is a couple of things. It's what CyberX does. We have experience looking at production OT networks around the world. And one of the things that we do on a yearly basis is analyze the data from the deployments that we do in order to see what is the state of our networks, IoT and OT networks. To what extent are they soft? And so I'd like to cover that data, give you a glimpse into just how bad/good things are, depending on your perspective, and then from there talk about some of the best practices for risk mitigation. And rest assured, the best practice will not be buy our stuff. It'll be do these things, which most of which CyberX also does, but there are other vendors out there. And I think in the spirit of in the spirit of trying to do what's right, what's important is that we're securing these things. This is critical infrastructure, and so there's many ways to skin a cat. So I just want to talk about some of the things that you can do, and there are a few choices out there for how to do it. So it's not a vendor pitch. It's just here's what the networks look like. Here's some of the things you can do to secure those networks. So just as background into this, most of you in this room, I hope either already were familiar with all of these attacks over the past, since 2009, really since Stuxnet, or if not, you probably are by Thursday of this week. You've seen slides similar to these. And I show this only if you are in that OT security space and you need help convincing the people with the economic power to buy or help or give you resources to help you secure your environments, that this is real, right? There are real attacks taking place. They have been taking place on a yearly basis. We saw, hopefully many of you got a chance to see Andy Greenberg speak about just how much damage GRU has done, how infiltrated they are into our networks, et cetera. So the threat is real. It's not meant to be FUD. You're all aware of this, but I just wanted to give this as background to what we're talking about. Why are things different? If someone were to ask, well, hey, the threat landscape is always changing. It's always getting worse. Why is it any different today? I think there's three main reasons why we're seeing a greater acceleration of risk. The first is that it's easier to monetize, and that's basically because of the existence or sort of the effectiveness of ransomware. It used to be that a hacker might do this for fun or for the lulz, as it were, anonymous or whomever. But today, one can make money off of this, and they do. And so the rise of Bitcoin has made that easier. The rise of ransomware has made that easier. The other thing is industrialization. So it's easier to perpetrate these attacks because many of them have become democratized. The tools to attack are democratized. So you can download things. You can look at IoT devices through Shodan. You can download things like Mimikatz, and you can do this stuff without necessarily having hacking skills. And then the third, I think, contributor to sort of this, this sea change is the nationalization of attacks. The fact that instead of, a young hacker in his mom's or her mom's basement perpetrating attacks, we have the resources of entire governments to bear brought on these attacks, and that raises the ability of the hackers to do real damage. So we're no longer just talking about financial damage. We're talking about potential loss of human life, for instance, in the case of Triton. So that's the background for all this. That's why we want to know what the networks look like and just how soft or hardened are our networks. And so the data that I'm going to show you, just a little bit about the methodology or where it comes from. In the past year, we've collected from 1,800 plus production IoT and ICS networks across 6 continents worldwide. We're talking about diverse industrial sectors, including energy, utilities, oil and gas, pharmaceuticals, chemicals, manufacturing, transportation, building management systems, and mining. We analyze the traffic using network traffic analysis. And then just as a sort of a word as far as, well, how the heck do you get this data out? We anonymize the data. We separate the data that we get from the names of the customers before we actually analyze and compile it. And so I see the clean version, if you will, and then we compile the report that I'm going to be talking about. Clean meaning no identifiable characteristics to the company. Okay, so what do we find in this past year? And we've been doing this for 3 years. This is the third year running. The first thing is that probably no surprise, there are lots of systems that have broken windows or unsupported Windows boxes in them. 62% if you're counting from XP in 2000. That jumps to 71% if you're counting Windows 7, which happened to have gone into end of support 9 days ago. On January 15th, or 14th rather. So the issue with that is that legacy Windows no longer receive security patches. They can be easily compromised by ransomware and destructive malware. We've seen that with Eternal Blue, Deja Blue. And it's, despite some of the hand-wringing that you'll see on Twitter or some of the shaming in some cases that'll happen on Twitter, if you're in charge of these OT networks, you know that it's not always easy or even possible to upgrade these Windows systems. So it's not a matter of people being lazy or dumb or not understanding that this is a problem. It's a matter of the fact that maintenance windows are short, and in some cases, even upgrading, if you're in pharmaceutical, for example, means that you have to rerun entire tests in order to meet FDA approvals. So it's not surprising. I guess there may be 2 lessons. One is, if you're in a company that has unsupported operating systems, you're not alone. And then there are things that you can do to help yourself going forward. And we'll talk about that in the second half. The other thing that we found is that we have stale signatures. So 66% of the networks that we deployed in, we did not see automatically updating antivirus. Which is a little bit of a two-sided coin, right? On the one hand, it's not good because that means that you are more susceptible to not only 0 days but also known malware. The flip side is it probably means that you don't have an open connection to the internet because that's how you would get this automatic update. You don't have automatic updates. I guess the important thing is to be aware and to have some sort of plan in place as to how you're going to mitigate that. Are you going to go through SneakerNet to update? Are you updating at all, et cetera? Also, application whitelisting now we're seeing that as a more and more common practice. And then, of course, if you're talking about embedded devices, which in most cases we are, it's not possible to have AV, right? You can't have an agent on a device. So there's all sorts of risks involved with either relying on antivirus or to update, and then there's some impossibilities associated with having antivirus on embedded devices. We also see within the networks, we see excessive access, meaning that 54% of the sites have devices that can be accessed using standard remote management protocols. So in this case, I'm not talking about connections to the internet. I'm talking about whether or not the devices within the networks can be accessed laterally through protocols such as RDP, SSH, et cetera. The reason that this might be a concern is that these are the protocols that are used to move laterally through networks in order to perform reconnaissance and in order to eventually cause damage. So ideally, we would want those of you who are in charge of these networks to lock down these protocols or the devices, shut down the ports or shut down the protocols themselves so that there's less opportunity to move laterally through networks. But this is happening today, and in more than half of the sites we're seeing these devices being accessed using standard remote management protocols. And then, unfortunately, we're also seeing lots of cases of unencrypted passwords. 64%, so almost 2/3 of sites are using unencrypted passwords. The problem with these is that if the passwords are in clear text, they can be sniffed by attackers doing cyber reconnaissance. And then once they're stolen, the passwords are used to compromise critical industrial devices. Why is this happening? Unencrypted passwords are typically associated with legacy devices that don't support modern secure protocols, right? So things like SNMP v3, SFTP, et cetera. So it's another challenge, sort of another data point for why or in what sense the networks themselves are soft. And then the last point is just not minding the gap, as it were. So we're seeing lots of sites that actually have direct paths to the internet. And again, maybe not surprising given the push to industrialize and to industrialize, meaning like industrialization 4.0, use more IoT devices to monitor your network. All of those, usually those devices require some sort of connection to the internet. So we're seeing more than a quarter of sites with some sort of a path from the OT network to the direct internet. That might be through a workstation on the enterprise side, out to the internet. And it's obviously having that increases your attack surface. So what do we want to do about that? I lied. I think this is the last one. We're also seeing in 22% of sites what we're calling indicators of threats. Kind of didn't quite want to say indicators of compromise because there's some disagreement about how to specifically define that. But in this case, we're talking about an indicator of threat as something like a traffic scanner, a malicious DNS query, or a DNS query to a malicious server, abnormal HTTP headers, excessive number of connections, in some cases just malware itself we're finding more often than we would like, et cetera. Sometimes this is just simply due to misconfigured equipment, but it's impossible not to know. Unless you're identifying that this is happening, it's possible to know why it's happening. And for sure, if it is happening, you want to be in a position where you can look into why and see whether it's malicious, or if it's not malicious, still make a change to make your equipment more operationally efficient. So that's almost a quarter of the sites where we're seeing some sort of indicator of threat. So, and this is just stepping back for a second, the median scores by industry. The scores themselves are assigned by CyberX, so it's not it's not a government agency, but it is something that we can use consistently in order to measure, the relative state of security in networks across industries. And so, for better or worse, oil and gas seems to do slightly better, possibly because they're more highly regulated or because there's more at stake there in case of a breach. Energy and utilities come in second, manufacturing third, pharmaceuticals fourth, and then other, which includes some of the categories I talked about before, like mining as fifth. There's a couple of reasons why we give these scores. One of them is, I guess the main one really is just so that the people who are implementing security controls can measure their progress over time. You could say, hey, when we started, we were at 70. We've implemented mitigation X, Y, and Z, and now we're at 76. And that way you can set goals that are easily understandable by people outside of your domain expertise. So things are bad. I think the question is, I think I've actually talked to people in this industry who sort of want to just throw their hands in the air. I talked to one woman at Atlanta ICS last year who told me that she was well aware that there were lots of problems in her OT network, but she just simply had no time to deal with them and didn't want to know what was wrong because her list on the IT side was already too long. So that's an ostrich sticking their heads in the sand strategy. Obviously not a good strategy, and I'm sure she wasn't proud to say that, but it is a reality for many people. Things are bad, right? When you have the majority of your networks have Windows boxes that are unsupported, you're susceptible to attack. You're susceptible to operational inefficiencies. But there is hope, right? And not only one hope, right? And I'm using this, by the way, that's not Baby Yoda. That's the original Yoda because I'm a Gen Xer, so I'm sort of a fan of the original trilogy. So it's, we don't only have Luke, we also have, as we know, there's also Leia in the background. So there's a couple of different things that we can do, 4 actually. And I'm basing these somewhat loosely on the consequence-driven cyber-informed engineering that's laid out by the Idaho National Labs. And those actions are to, first of all, identify your crown jewels. Second of all, map the digital terrain in your networks. Third of all, illuminate the most likely attack paths to those crown jewels. And then fourth, mitigate and protect. Which maybe seems kind of obvious, but I'll be a little bit more specific about that as we jump through. So first of all, what do we mean by crown jewel processes? I don't know if that's a term that people actually use outside of academia. It is maybe just a quick show of hands. Is crown jewels like a term that's come up in the past year in your organization? Oh, several yeses. Okay. All right. So basically, we're talking about a process that, if it were to fail, it would represent some sort of catastrophic loss either to your organization or even to the environment or the country in which you're in. It could be related to revenue, lawsuits, brand reputation, theft of intellectual property, or some sort of major compliance violation that would put you in financial trouble. Identifying the crown jewel requires conversations, and that's not always easy for engineers. So it requires meeting of 2 different groups that don't typically talk: network engineers and security engineers, IT engineers and OT engineers, business owners and OT analysts and engineers. Oftentimes, for right, wrong, or indifferent, if we can get those 2 groups of people into the room at the same time, we're 80% of the way towards solving 80% of these problems. So just identifying the crown jewel processes is a huge step towards solving some of these problems with these soft networks. What are some examples would be of a crown jewel process would be a safety system, a critical production line, transformers of compression statements, or the historians, especially within the pharma industry. The second step is to map the digital terrain. So in other words, just get a sense for what is in your network. Which assets do I have? And how are they connected? And this is a screenshot. This happens to be from CyberX, but you can do this with several tools. The important thing is that you do it. You understand what is in your network. If you don't know what's in your network, you certainly have no path towards vulnerability management. You don't know which of the PLCs you're using are using which protocols, whether or not they have, if they have an alert associated with them, what is that alert, what can you do about it, et cetera. And once you do this, ideally, when you've mapped the digital terrain, you have a list of assets, you also have some sort of a vulnerability assessment associated with that tells you, okay, hey, if you were to attack this asset A, B, and C, you would improve your security score by 10 or 15 or X%. If you do A, B, and C instead of X, Y, Z, then you would improve by 40%. So you have some sort of a sense after you do this as to how to prioritize. Because prioritization is key here because we have lots and lots and lots of problems. So we need to understand in which order are we going to attack those problems in order to have the greatest effect and in order to better protect the networks. So you map the terrain, and then you can illuminate the most likely attack paths, or ideally you should illuminate the most likely attack paths. So you know where everything is, or where most of your assets are. You know where the crown jewels are, and now you want to figure out, okay, what are all the paths through that network and through those assets to the crown jewels. And this example over here on the right, this again, this is a screenshot from a CyberX console that shows, you've identified our aptly named PLC number 11 as your crown jewels. Let's say that's where the secret chicken recipe is stored. And you want to know what's the path from, what's the path that an attacker could take into there. So we see, if we go backwards, we see that there's an infrastructure server that has a known CVE associated with it, because we've already mapped that in our digital terrain. We see that there's a control center that also has a known CVE, another control center with a known CVE, and that control center has a direct connection to the internet. So that's your path in. Now your options here can be to simply turn off the internet connection here. It can be to address this particular CVE through a patch, or address one of these CVEs, et cetera. But you have options at this point. If you're able to illuminate the most likely attack paths, you can take action in order to protect your crown jewels. And again, this comes back to prioritization. You've got a map of hundreds, thousands, maybe tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of assets. Start by protecting the assets that you know pose the greatest risk to your business, and then you can work backwards and figure out what steps you can take to protect yourself. Our customers, I think in general, human nature is such that it's easier to attack this stuff if you have a plan that is prioritized. Otherwise, it can quickly become overwhelming to think about, oh my God, our networks are soft. There's the threat landscape is changing at such a quick pace because of digitization, because of industrialization, because there's GDP now here. What the heck can I do? Should I just stick my head in the sand? No, you can actually take steps to protect yourself. The fourth step is to mitigate and protect. And so what do we mean by that? So first of all, you can reduce the number of digital pathways to a minimum. Once you have that asset map and you see just how many connections there are, you can start to turn some of them off. Does Bob on the enterprise side need to have a connection into the process control layer? Does anyone on the factory floor need to have a connection to the internet? And we do find these things, by the way. It's a little bit scary and it seems a little bit absurd, but if people are people, humans are humans, and if they're working on an assembly line, they may still want to check ESPN for scores. That's obviously an attack path that's not good. Once you see that, you can shut it down. And maybe have a conversation as well about where that person can go to check scores. So that's one thing. You're just simply reducing the number of unauthorized internet connections. You're segmenting the network. You're using some sort of identity management and secure remote access for your process control network. And then you can address vulnerabilities. If you have weak passwords, if you have unused open ports, you can shut them down. Patch where possible. Obviously not always possible, but at least which machines are unpatched. And then, if and when you've done this, maybe you've done some of this, you can't do all of it, then you need to start thinking about compensating controls. And again, CyberX is one of the companies that can do this for you. But basically, we're talking about continuous monitoring with behavioral anomaly detection as recommended by NIST. In other words, you want to be able to tell when one of your devices is doing something that's not programmed to do or not designed to do. And you also want to be able to tell when one of the devices on your network is doing something that's different from what it has done over the past X hours, days, weeks, or months. And you want to be able to alert on that. And when you do alert on that, you want to be able to integrate that alert with your existing SIM or a new SIM, whatever. Usually you don't want to reinvest. But you want to be able to integrate what you're finding on the OT side with what's already existing in your IT SOC. Right? And this is hopefully just common sense. But it's something that you want to check with whatever vendor you're choosing. Does vendor XYZ have an integration with whatever firewall you happen to be using? Is it PAN? Is it Fortinet? What SIM are you using? Is it Splunk? Is it QRadar, et cetera? And if they do, and they can show you that they do, then it might be a good choice for you. Okay, so that's mitigate and protect. All of what I'm describing here is downloadable from our website, cyberx.io/riskreport-220. There's a lot more information in here. This is a relatively brief overview of everything that of what's in this report. And just very, very briefly, just to tell you, I told you it's not a vendor pitch, but I do want to tell you who we are. CyberX is an industrial platform that's built by blue team experts with nation-state experience defending national infrastructure. So we've done this before in a nation-state capacity, and we've also done it now you saw just from this report, in 1,800 deployments in this year. Over the course of the past 3 years, 3,000 deployments. So we've seen lots of different environments. We've run into lots of challenges, and we've built the product such that we can solve those problems over time. So with experience comes maturity. We're now easier to deploy with each new deployment, and we have plenty of references if you're interested that you can speak to privately about what we do. And Gartner is also saying, by the way, that we're the fastest and easiest to deploy. Having said all that, just to sum up, the threat actors and the motivations are varied and real, right? The anonymization of currency has made it easier for people to make money off of these attacks. The industrialization of tools has made it easier for more people to become involved in the attacks. Those two things alone combined mean really a sea change in the threat landscape. And then the fact that nation states are involved means that there's orders of magnitude more money available to launch these types of attacks. Second, and this is where we spend most of the time, our assets and networks are soft. You probably already knew that. Hopefully this gave you a little bit of a sense for just how soft they are, and maybe some hope that if you're if you're in charge of this stuff and you're feeling ashamed that the networks are as soft as they are, you're not alone, right? This is happening across the industry, across the country, across the world, every continent that we go into. It's a nascent field. And so the last thing that I want anyone to do is stick their head in the sand and just say, I just can't deal with it anymore. What we want to do is provide some sort of a path forward to take action, to make things better for your network, make our countries collectively safer. And then finally, there is still hope. Even though the assets and networks are soft, yet no, you're not alone. And yes, there is hope. You can identify the crown jewels, you can illuminate the attack paths, you can prioritize mitigations, and then you can practice hygiene daily. And I just wanted to leave as an image here, given that we're in Florida. We were in a place as a country where we were behind in the space race, right? The Soviet Union had launched Sputnik. It seemed as though they were better at teaching math and engineering. It seemed like we were losing. We were losing to Russia, and President Kennedy issued a challenge. He said, we can go to the moon, right? We can go and we built the Space Center right here in Cape Canaveral, now the Kennedy Space Center. And then since then, launched the Space Shuttle program, and now, still continue to invest. So change can and does happen. It has happened in this state, and it can happen, I think, even in an industry where it seems like there are so many obstacles to progress. There is hope, and good things do happen if we set our minds to it.